All right, we're live. It's late Saturday night. It's early Sunday morning. It's the Panther-Lair Post-Game show. Starting a little after 1 a.m. here on Sunday, October 2nd, in the aftermath of Pitt's 26-21 loss to Georgia Tech at Acrisure Stadium. And, you know, we're letting everybody filter in here, get jump in on the live stream as we go here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. People can get in the chat section there and offer their comments and their questions and share some input on this game, what they think happened. You can have your comments about why Pitt lost this game. Ask your questions about why I think Pitt lost this game, although I'm going to tell you, and I don't think we're going to differ too much in our opinions on the source of this one. But you can get in the chat screen and we can all talk. I know everybody's still awake, even though it's very early in the morning or late at night, depending on your perspective on things. And I certainly didn't expect Pitt to win or to lose this game. I mean, there was no. I mean, obviously, this was a game that this should have been, if not a gimme, if not an easy one or something like that. It should have been the game they won. I don't think there's any question about that. But there are questions, and there are a lot of questions about this team, and they're questions that we've talked about a lot over the course of this week, over the course of this season. I mean, to be fair, coming out of the first third of the season, we had a lot of questions about this team. And I think in the last week, given how the schedule set up with the 4 non-conference games and then this break, and then October 1st being the first ACC game, the first of 8 conference games to sort of finish out the schedule, it really felt like the time to talk about some of these questions. And I talked about them a lot. I talked about it after the Rhode Island game. I talked about it on the Morning Pit multiple times this week. Asked Pat Narduzzi about it at his press conference on Monday. And it was all questions about the offense. I mean, I wrote about offensive identity. I talked about offensive identity. I asked questions about offensive identity. And it boiled down to this simple question of, does this offense, who does this offense think it is? Who does this offense, what does this offense want to be? What does this offense do well? What do they believe they do well? What is the foundation of this offense? Because every offense has to have something that they do well, that they build from. And if it's the pass to set up the run, if it's the run to set up the pass, if it's just you're good at everything, whatever it is, you have to have something. You have to have something that's your foundation, something that is a threat that other teams have to account for, that they know, well, when you play Pitt, you've got to be prepared for this. And I said through the first 4 games, we didn't really know what those things were or what that was with Pitt. And part of the reason we didn't know was because they went a game and a half without their starting quarterback. And that's understandable. That's fair, and particularly you went out to the Western Michigan game, you were playing with your 3rd string quarterback, you had to find a way to win, and you did just that. But to come back last week and play Rhode Island at home and not use that as an opportunity to work out some of the wrinkles, some of the issues, some of the holdups, some of the rhythm in the passing game. And we talked about it after the game last Saturday. Yeah, I mean, this isn't vindication for anyone. It's a loss, and we're not going to try and pretend like it's something else. But we all talked about it after the game last Saturday. There was a missed opportunity. Pitt got the win. They won by 3 touchdowns. That's great. They did what they needed to do. They took care of business. But in that situation, with Keaton Slovis coming back, having missed a game and a half, and who knows how much practice time, he needed to get into a rhythm with his receivers. And he didn't do it. They threw screen passes. They ended up with more yards after the catch than actual recorded passing yards and receiving yards because so many passes were thrown behind the line of scrimmage in that game. And that's not the basis of Pitt's passing game. That's not what if it's the basis of Pitt's passing game, they sure as heck didn't do it tonight against Georgia Tech. So that's not the foundation of the passing game. That's not how you're building your passing game. And to be quite honest, you're not going to run 10 screens in a game or 14 passes behind the line of scrimmage in a game. That's not how you're going to have to attack downfield. You're going to have to use the middle of the field. You're going to have to shoot, medium distance passes, and you're going to have to be able to go downfield. And there really hadn't been a lot done in that regard. It was the second half of West Virginia and the first half of Tennessee, and now you're at the end of 4 games, and that's all you've really got. That's all the experience you've really got doing those things in games. And so whether or not you could do it, we didn't know because we hadn't actually seen you even try. And now you come into the ACC schedule without anything really to get into that kind of groove or rhythm. And you saw it in the first half. Keaton Slovis was, and it's Slovis, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this, but the passing game as a whole, it was miserably bad. 2 of his first 10 passes. He completed 2 of his first 10 passes for 8 yards. And one of those completions was a pass to Ryan friggin' Jacoby. No disrespect to Ryan friggin' Jacoby. And I know he's wearing 84, but he's an offensive lineman. And on 2nd and 8, you throw him a 3-yard pass. And whether that was the called play, or that was something Slovis decided to do, or he didn't like any of his other options and he checked it down to the tight end who's a converted offensive lineman for 3 yards, and that's one of your 2 completions on your first 10 attempts, in which you have 8 total passing yards. Now, Slovis ended up finishing the first half playing much better. Completed 4 of his final 6 passes for 53 yards and a touchdown, and it looked like he was getting into a rhythm. But they wasted the first 5 possessions of the game trying to shake off some of the rust in the passing game. And then when he finally got into a rhythm, and then they come out in the second half and they start turning the ball over. And it was no surprise that Pat Narduzzi went to the turnovers. He mentioned those sort of right off the bat. He was asked later in his press conference about having, different injuries on the offensive line and missing guys on the offensive line. Carter Warden didn't play. Owen Drexel is still out. So you have Jake Cradle at center. You have Blake Zabovic at right guard. Mackin Salves is playing. Branson Taylor's playing. You're rotating guys. You're moving guys around. And Narduzzi was asked about that, and he said, yeah, we did that, but that wasn't why we lost. We lost because of turnovers. Ultimately, you did. But guess what? If you are not so out of sorts in the passing game in the first half, if you're not so out of sorts that you go 2 of 10 on your first 10 passing attempts, that you come out against a team that gave up 600 yards in the ground in the last 2 games combined, and on your first 3 plays you throw the ball, if you have any kind of semblance of cohesive offense in the first half, you might be able to withstand those turnovers in the second half. With how well Pitt's defense was playing, the defense was spotting them room to screw up and have turnovers. 2 very uncharacteristic Vincent Davis fumbles and an interception that, it was a pretty bad throw, a pretty bad decision by Slovis, but also a pretty impressive play by the defender to sort of just take that ball away from Carter Johnson. It was a bad decision by Slovis, and again, I think he kind of stared him down. But you can maybe absorb those and withstand those and get out of it and say, well, we played an ugly game, but we still won, if you have any kind of offense in the first half. And so now you got a real problem. Right? You got a real problem because we came out of that first third of the season. We came out of the month of September, an entire month of the season saying, still don't know who this offense is. What is this offense? What do they want to be? What do they want to do? And are they good at anything? We came out of that first third of the season, that first month of the season, asking those questions. And it turns out, not only do we not get answers to those questions, but the reality is if we did find some answers, they're really bad. They are bad for this offense. If this game tonight gave some answers about who this offense is and who they can be and what their ceiling is, I don't think you want those answers. I don't think you want the answers that were delivered by this game. And so now, again, you're facing even more questions coming out of game 5. And this is the other thing. This is 5 games into the season. You're not in week 2 here. You're not in week 3. You just finished week 5. You're about to play the 6th game of a 12-game schedule. You're about to go into the halfway point of the season. And you still don't know what your offense is. You still don't know what you're doing with your offense. And you still don't know what you want to be on offense. If you want to be a run team, fine, run it. I would recommend that you run it out of some more spread out formations. I would recommend that you don't necessarily need 6 offensive linemen on the field very often. I would recommend that if you want to on occasion use a fullback, that's probably not the worst idea. I would recommend that you have guys who can run with different running styles. Vincent Davis showed some promise tonight. Obviously, Izzy Abanikanda is good, although he left the game with an injury. Rodney Hammond could come back at some point, should come back at some point, and that'll be a boost to the group. If you want to be a running team, be a running team, and build off of that. But at some point, you're going to have to pass. And if you run the ball so well, that, teams are expecting you to do it, then you can use play action. And eventually they did use play action in this game, and I think they got a 15-yard completion to Konate Mumfield out of it. But if you get to the midpoint of the season and you're still trying to figure out who you are, still trying to figure out what you want to do, still trying to figure out what you're good at, that's a problem. That's a big problem. Because these are questions you should have answered a while ago. And again, some of it, Keaton Slovis gets hurt at the end of the first half against Tennessee. It takes him out for that entire, the second half of that game and the entire Western Michigan game. That's a major slowdown to the development and progress of your offense. All right. And coming into it, new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, a bunch of new wide receivers, new receiver coach. You're going to have this period of transition. You're going to have this period of sort of finding out who you are, feeling out the offense and figuring out what you do well and what you can build on and what you want to focus and emphasize. And you had a rough start. You had to start against West Virginia and Tennessee. Whereas breaking in a whole new offense and some of these guys at key positions, maybe it would have been better, ideally if you start with Rhode Island and Western Michigan and then the two Power 5 teams. You can kind of work your way through those kinks. But you didn't have that. That's not the way the schedule set up. So you had to adjust and you had to deal with the schedule the way it was. That doesn't mean there was any reason whatsoever to waste last week's game and really make no progress on the development of your offense, no progress on getting some cohesion in the passing game and some cohesiveness. There's no reason to do that. That was a wasted opportunity right there. And we said, this isn't just in retrospect. This isn't just in hindsight. We said it after the game. I think we sat here on the Panther-Lair Post-Game last Saturday night and said, would have liked to have seen them do a little bit more. Would have liked to have seen them try a little bit more with the passing game here just to get into some of that rhythm, to help those receivers understand the importance of the details, understand the importance of running their routes really sharp, being on their spots and being where they need to be so the quarterback can rely on them and maybe get rid of the ball a little bit quicker. And on that topic, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Keaton Slovis played great. 305 yards, 3 touchdowns, 26 of 45 completions. Those are all hollow stats. Outside of, again, going 4 of 6 for 53 yards at the end of the first half. Everything else was pretty hollow for Keaton Slovis tonight with 305 yards and 3 touchdowns. Shout out to Jim Hammett for the prediction in the 3-2-1 column where he predicted that Slovis would throw 3 touchdowns. He ended up being right about that. But those 2 fourth quarter touchdowns, virtually pointless. And against a defense that was, that prevent defense, they were pretty much giving you those yards. There's not a lot that you're going to take away from those plays. Slovis did not look good in the first half. I imagine that when people smarter than me look at the film of that first half, they would contend that the receivers didn't look very good either. The offensive line. And this comes back to something that I was thinking about on the drive home from the stadium. There are a lot of people on this team, not just players, not just coaches, people. A lot of people on this team who are not as good as they needed to be, as they have needed to be, and not as good as they'll need to be going forward. And some of these guys we had some higher expectations for. I think we expected Keaton Slovis to be better. I think we expected Konate Mumfield to be better. I think we expected Bub Means to be better. I think we expected Frank Signetti to be better. And it hasn't come through. And those guys, I think I think we made a mistake if we expected Keaton Slovis to be Kenny Pickett. I think we made a mistake if we expected Konate Mumfield to be Jordan Addison. Those are unfair comparisons and unrealistic comparisons. And I think I probably said that. As much as I might have pumped up Konate Mumfield and Keaton Slovis and Bub Means and even Frank Signetti, I don't think I sat here and I think I probably went out of my way to say, look, I don't know if Keaton Slovis is going to be Kenny Pickett. I don't think he's going to be Kenny Pickett. I know I said that because I said he needs to be good or better. I don't know if he can be great. I don't know if he needs to be great, but he's got to be good or better. Konate Mumfield, same thing. I'm sure I said I don't think he's Jordan Addison, but I think he can be a really good receiver. Well, Slovis hasn't been at the level he needs to be at. Mumfield hasn't been at the level he needs to be at. Bub Means, I mean, it felt like he barely played tonight. Jaden Bradley got a ton of those snaps and did something with it. He ended up with 2 catches for 2 touchdowns, 44 yards total. So, he ends up with a nice stat line. Again, some of those hollow stats in the fourth quarter. But quite frankly, I would agree that Frank Cignetti has not been as good as he needed to be thus far. And I think there are a lot of issues with this offense right now. Now, I will say that there is still part of me that holds on to the thought that these are talented players. That Kedon Slovis is not a complete bum at quarterback. That Konate Mumfield is not a complete bum at quarterback. That, Bub Means and Jaden Bradley and all these guys, that they're not complete bums. I believe they can play. I believe that there have been little moments when they've shown what they can do. And I believe that, both this season and in their previous stops, I mean, Mumfield was not it's not like Mumfield and Slovis came to Pitt without any prior experience or any, resume or history of success. They were both very good at their previous stops. What they've not done is found a way to get into that rhythm and show that consistency that they've needed. And they haven't done it. And again, you're now approaching the halfway point of the season. And you're approaching the halfway point of the season with gigantic questions about this offense. Questions that ideally would have been answered 3 weeks ago. But they haven't been. And while I don't think Pitt is going to go 3-9, I don't think Pitt's going to go 6-6. I do think that this will get worked out. I think they'll find a way to be more effective and more productive than they were tonight. Look, I mean, they did move the ball downfield late in the game, and I think in those situations you kind of take those stats with a grain of salt. But the reality is they did just sort of let it fly. I thought they took some chances in the passing game late in the game. Kedon Slovis just sort of winging it a little bit. Not necessarily making it up as he goes, but letting the ball fly, which I think, maybe try that a little bit earlier in the game. Take a few chances. Take a few risks. Show the opponent that you're willing to at least try to take some of those shots. I mean, you think about the Western Michigan game. You think about the throw that when Jared Wayne got hurt. I mean, Kedon Slovis didn't throw that kind of pass at all tonight, maybe until those final 2 drives. He didn't even attempt a pass like that. Everything was short. Everything was less than medium distance. Maybe one pass down the left sideline that I can remember in the first 3 quarters where he tried to throw one to Konate Mumfield down the left. And that was probably the deepest pass we saw. Not even trying it. And that has to be part of the arsenal. That has to be part of the attack. Ideally, that's what you're setting up with all the running plays. And it's just not there. It's just not even being tried. And if you don't feel like you've got your team in a rhythm, if you don't feel like Slovis and the receivers are in enough, are connected well enough that you want to try those passes, if you feel like there's too much risk associated with it because those guys aren't on the same page enough, I mean, that's a failure of coaching. That's a failure of coaching of things that should have been accomplished in training camp and should have been accomplished through the first 4 games of the season. Even if you only had Slovis for 2.5 of them. Again, I said this on Twitter. I don't necessarily know if the passing game would have just been dynamite all game today if they had worked on it a little bit more against Rhode Island, but it sure as hell wouldn't have hurt. I don't think live game reps are a bad thing. And they had an opportunity for him, and they passed on it altogether. The defense gave up some stuff late in the game. It looked like they kind of gave up a little bit in those situations. I'm not going to hold a whole lot against the defense here. I thought they played pretty great game for the most part throughout, up until, the final. When did Georgia Tech even score? I mean, yeah, the fourth quarter. I mean, they were pretty dominant until, let's see. I mean, even the touchdown was on a 34-yard drive after a fumble. I mean, the defense played well enough for me. I'm not going to give them a hard time about, giving up the late touchdowns. Although, they deserve a little bit of grief because there was a chance for Pitt to kind of, the nail in the coffin came on a Georgia Tech touchdown. So you give them a little bit of grief over that. But overall, I mean, they played well enough for 3 quarters to win the game. And if the offense had done anything in those 3 quarters, then a little bit of a slide by the defense in the fourth quarter wouldn't have been a killer. But, all right, I want to get to comments and questions, see what people are talking about here tonight. Yeah, if you want to be a super chatter also, if you want to make sure your comment gets read, your question gets answered, you can be a super chatter. You can click that little $sign down at the bottom, contribute to the podcast. Kevin Plaucha did that. And he says, is there a potential conditioning problem too? So many, pardon me, damn injuries. I don't think so. I mean, I think things happen. I always have a hard time with, injuries, putting it on the strength staff. I guess sometimes if it's a soft tissue injury, there could be something like that. But I don't think I wouldn't say it's it's hard for me to, without looking at each injury individually and knowing all the details of it and then being smart enough about physiology and that kind of thing, it's hard for me to make a judgment on whether you want to put on the strength staff or something like that. Mark Thurkel says, are you all afraid to challenge Narduzzi because no one does? Or do you think there are no tough questions to be asked? So that's a good question. I mean, I think there are times to ask sort of the challenging questions. I'll be honest. I mean, sometimes, and maybe this just makes me bad at my job, I look at some situations and I'm like, it's just look at what is the realistic outcome of this? If I ask Pat Narduzzi, are you going to fire Frank Signetti? I mean, what are we really going to get out of that? I think, and I would say this too. The post-game press conference is a little different from like the Monday press conference or the Thursday media sit down that we have with Pat Narduzzi. The post-game press conference, you're generally not going to get a whole lot, maybe other than complaining about the referees. Everybody makes fun of the Narduzzi saying, I have to look at the tape. What he's really saying there is, look, I don't genuinely think there are very many things he needs to look at the tape to know about. Maybe if there's a penalty he really disagrees with, he wants to look at the tape on that one to see if he's right, if his recollection of the play is right. For the most part, I think when, the opposing team makes a big play, he knows what happened on that play. There may be some details that he looks at tape and he's either confirms or he's surprised by. But for the most part, I think he knows what happens. I think when we ask him, what happened here or what happened there, or why'd you punt 5 times and in your first, or punt 4 times and then turn it over on downs on your first 5 possessions, we'll have to look at the tape. He knows what happened in those situations. He knows if the wrong route was run. He knows if the quarterback, got out of the pocket too soon or set the protection to the wrong side. I think he knows those things pretty well. But he has no interest in disclosing them when he talks immediately after a game. He has no interest in disclosing any of that, and he hasn't thought about it enough to really know how he wants to say it sort of diplomatically without throwing anyone under the bus. And so I think that's why you get those, I have to look at the tape answers, And so you get to Monday, sort of calm down, not as much emotions, and you can sort of get into some of those topics a little more. And I think that's where sometimes you can have more of a discussion about maybe what happened here, what happened there. When he even said himself, I think the Monday after the West Virginia game, that he felt coming out of that West Virginia game like Keaton Slovis was holding on to the ball too long. And then he actually did look at the tape and saw that it was the receivers not being sharp enough in their routes, not being where they need to be. And so Slovis was holding on to the ball because his receivers weren't giving him the targets they were supposed to be giving him. And so that was the case where looking at the tape actually was beneficial, and I think added something to our understanding of, the issues facing the team. And so those post-game press conferences, I think, are sometimes an odd situation or an odd setting to get into some of these topics. So you look at last Monday when I asked Pat Narduzzi about offensive identity, and I thought he gave a good answer on that question. If I had asked that Saturday night after the Rhode Island game, I probably wouldn't have gotten as insightful of an answer. That's, I think there are tough questions that get asked. I think there are different settings where maybe different types of questions are more ideal. Post-game press conference is not always that particular setting. All right. Brock Madonic says, who's to blame for the offense? and then Scott Lynch follows it up and says, if I had to put percentages on who is to blame for the offense, what percentage do you give Cignetti, Slovis, and others? Percentage wise. So that's tough for me to answer. I do think, I don't think the receivers have been good enough. I think I would probably start there. I think everyone, pretty much all parties involved, save for like Gavin Bartholomew and Rodney Hammond, have played, subpar. I guess you would say Izzy Abanikanda as well, although his game tonight, 10 carries for 31 yards, not exactly inspiring stuff. Pretty much everyone in the offense has played below expectations and below the level they need to be at in order, for Pitt to win, to have a successful season, to have an effective offense and win a bunch of games. I don't think anybody's really been at the level they need to be on the offense I'm talking about. And that goes from Frank Cignetti down through Keaton Slovis, down through, the offensive line, and then out to, again, aside from like Gavin Bartholomew, out to the wide receivers. And I think the receivers have been a problem, and maybe even a big problem. Like I say, we've heard Pat Narduzzi talk about it, about the, how they've complicated the issues for Keaton Slovis, that, it looks like he's holding onto the ball too long because guys aren't necessarily getting open. Now, we can sit up there and we can see that guys are open. We can see that some guys are open and some guys are not. We don't know how the reads go, who the number one read is, the number two, and this kind of thing and that kind of thing. I think probably, to answer your question, Scott, about what percentage would I put on Cignetti and what percentage would I put on Slovis, I'm not sure. But I think probably for the vast majority of the fan base, you would probably take a few percentage points off of Slovis and put it toward the receivers. I think some of what we put on Keaton Slovis is actually on the receivers. And then there are passes that hit these guys in the hands. Jared Wayne, uncharacteristic drop. Jaden Bradley gives up a couple. I think Carter Johnson had one or two that he dropped. Like, he's getting little help from his wide receivers right now. And I don't know how much that would improve if you put in Nate Yarnell. And I know there were calls for Nate Yarnell to play. I know some fans wanted to see Yarnell go in. Look, I mean, he looked good on his 12 pass attempts at Western Michigan. How does that translate to playing in a full game with a full game plan where you're not just going to be running the ball the whole time? I don't know. That might be a little more tricky, but if the receivers aren't going to be sharp, and they aren't going to be detailed, and they aren't going to be where they're supposed to be, and they're not going to catch the ball when it's thrown to them, I don't know if it gets any better with Nate Yarnell. You know what I mean? So, I don't want to sit and say that I think the receivers are the biggest problem. I don't think they're a majority of the issues, but they might be a plurality. I think they do bear a lot of responsibility when it comes to the issues with this passing game right now. And probably just as much, if not more, responsibility than Slovis, because their play or their unreliability, their inconsistency negatively impacts the way the quarterback plays. There's only so much he can do. And look, we should never doubt, and I don't think anyone ever did, but the Jordan Addison was a special player. And I think we knew that. We knew that when we watched him play last year. But seeing sort of the alternative this year, it's pretty stark. And I think while I've sort of not rejected, but I pushed back against the idea that, the offensive line maybe wasn't that good last year, Kenny Pickett just bailed them out. I don't entirely believe that. I think there were times when he did. I don't entirely believe that. I do think that Pickett and Addison, in particular, those two guys, bailed Pitt as a team out a whole lot. I think they carried that team a whole lot. I think there were times where there was nothing going, and those two guys, either together or separately, made something happen, and literally carried the team to victories. I mean, they were that good. And it's sort of inevitable that you're going to have a fall off when you go from two players that are that good, a Biletnikoff Award winner and a Heisman Trophy finalist, and you go to guys who are maybe still talented but not as good. Because and right now, Keaton Slovis and Konate Mumfield have not shown the ability to carry the team the way those two guys did. Now, maybe you don't need a quarterback and an undersized wide receiver to carry your team. Maybe you can do it with a more balanced attack and get more people involved and do it in different ways, which is a great idea, but they're not executing it right now. And there aren't enough reliable, consistent receivers, or there aren't enough receivers playing at a reliable, consistent level right now that that you can count on that part of the team stepping up. All right, let's get here, see what else. Garrett Sherwin says, I don't know what the answer is, but losses like tonight in Western Michigan are frustrating and just can't keep happening. Yeah, I mean, you gotta avoid frustrating bad losses, and I felt I've always felt if Pat Narduzzi had done a good job of that, but I mean the reality is he's had some bad losses along the way. Now Western Michigan was that first sort of non-Power 5 bad loss. I don't count Navy in the bowl game back in 2015. Navy was a ranked team at that point, but Western Michigan was really the first non-Power 5 bad loss for Narduzzi. This game tonight has precedent. You might remember the 2017 North Carolina game. Pitt wasn't favored as much in that game as they were against Georgia Tech, but it was, North Carolina was a team that went 3-9 that year. They only beat one Power 5 team, and that was Pitt. Pitt was kind of on a little bit of a roll, even though the 2017 team wasn't great. They were on a little bit of a roll. They'd won a couple games. It seemed like they were figuring themselves out. North Carolina was really bad. They had one win at that point. And they came into Heinz Field and beat Pitt as double-digit underdogs. That was a really bad loss. The 2018 North Carolina game wasn't much better. That was a really bad loss, too. Those are probably Narduzzi's two worst conference losses. Those two North Carolina games, 2017 and 2018. Pitt was a double-digit favorite against NC State in 2020, which I have a hard time looking back and saying that's a bad loss. Even though they were favored by double digits. Actually, some of the 2019 games, I mean, the Boston College game in 2019 for sure, and really, even though it's weird to say because it's Miami, I mean, Miami was really bad in 2019, and the fact that Pitt lost to them was pretty brutal. So there have been some bad conference losses, for sure. And even though I did tweet something about, what's the worst loss, or about how I still thought Western Michigan was a worse loss in this game, I tweeted that out sort of immediately after the game. But since then, my focus has pretty much just been on this game and this season, because they now have 7 more games and not a lot of time to figure it out. I mean, really, they have 7 days to figure out this offense, or else this season's going to be, either a lot of nail biters or just out and out losses. Kevin Plouch says, for fear of this comment being considered the same as every other one, I'll just say this game freaking sucked. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a good game. I mean, from the jump, the defense played really well. Like I said, for the most of the game, obviously there were some dropped interceptions. They need to hold on to those. I mean, Eric Howlett should have had at least, he had a chance at 3 interceptions. Tyler Wiltz had one hit his hand. Shane Simon had one hit his hands. Howlett would have had at least a pick 6, if not 2. There were real opportunities there for the defense, but they were playing so well that I just sort of give them a pass. I'm like, yeah, but they are just shutting down Georgia Tech until the very end. But yeah, it was a bad one. Let's see. I mean, I'm just going to read through them all. I might not always have something to say to your comments, but Kevin Plouch says, just absolutely brutal. Francis says, I better not hear anything positive. That game was trash. I mean, I guess, I don't know, the pass rush was going pretty well. I mean, they got to Jeff Sims. They sacked him 4 times, although it was all pretty early in the game. They kind of fell off a little bit. Let's see. Christian Ricketts says, this is one of the games you could almost feel coming. I didn't. I looked at it and I said, you don't want to be another team's catalyst. You know what I mean? If a team is struggling, you don't want to be the game that sort of propels them, the jumping off point or the springboard for them to, a team that's reeling, for a lot of reasons, for losing and then all the off-field turmoil and strife and all that stuff. You don't want to be the reason that they sort of rally. You don't want to, like I said, you don't want to be the catalyst. You don't want to be another team's catalyst. And so in that sense, yes, kind of, I could tell that the potential there was, with the possibility was there. But Georgia Tech had just been not great. I mean, they actually played Clemson tough. I mean, they played Clemson tough in the opener. But then, and then who'd they beat? Western Carolina or something like that. And then they lost to Ole Miss and UCF. And so you thought this should be a game that Pitt should win, given where Pitt appears to stand in the Coastal and where Pitt appears to stand in the ACC. This should be a game that Pitt wins. And probably wins comfortably. I don't know if I thought they would cover 20 points or 23 or whatever it ended up being, but it should be a game that Pitt could win comfortably. And quite frankly, when the defense did what it did on the first drive and really seemed to like it was going to take control of the game, I thought, okay, yeah, they'll be all right. And they'll get the running game going and everything they'll be fine. Well, apparently not. And so I mean, even late into the second half, I was pretty sure that this team, they were going to find a way to pull it out. And we would spend all week talking about how they were not good and they should drop out of the polls and all these things. But they would find a way to hold on. And that didn't happen. They didn't. Let's see. Rolling through comments and questions. Scott Lynch, is this game different with a healthy Izzy Abanikanda and Rodney Hammond for 60 minutes? That's an interesting question. Is it different with a healthy Abanikanda and Hammond? I don't know. They only ran the ball 27 times with the running backs. Vincent Davis had 15 carries. Izzy had 10, and Sebo Flemister had 2. Keaton Slovis ended up with 3 carries, and they had a kneel down that counts as another rushing attempt. But you're looking at 27 rushing attempts for the running backs. Let's see. One other. 16 rushing attempts for the running backs in the first half. While I think we accuse them of running too much and being too committed to the run and being stuck in Stone Age football or what have you, I didn't actually think they committed to it well enough. They came out and tried to pass right off the bat. And I think they probably needed to be more committed to the run. I think Rodney Hammond increases your chances of victory. I think Izzy Abanikanda getting hurt decreases your chances of victory. So, yeah, is there a different outcome if those two guys play in this game? I don't know. It's hard. That's hard for me to say because I'm not sure if they really changed the outcome of the passing game. And, again, even if the teams would have loaded up to stop Abanikanda and Hammond, we still only saw play action just a handful of times, And so I'm not even sure. I don't know what kind of impact they would have had. I think you're better when you have both of those guys available. I'm not sure if it would have changed the outcome of the game. Ryan W. says, let's stick to noon games. The offense looked like it was ready for bed or get some more smelling salts. I don't know if it's about primetime games or what it is, but it didn't work. Let's see. Whoa, excuse me. It's almost 2 a.m., so what are you going to do? Dan Green says it's a bad loss, but it's not a doomsday situation. However, Keaton Slovis looks really bad, and that concerns me way more than any one loss. I think... So it's tough to sort of determine, right? When it comes to Slovis, when it comes to Signetti, when it comes to the receivers... You got to find a way to get the receivers open. You have to find a way to scheme them open. You have to find a way to coach them to run the routes well. You have to coach them to create separation, and whether that's a natural talent or something that they can do, through the way they run their routes. I don't know. I don't know what's lacking there. If it's the attention to details or if it's just natural speed or whatever it is. But you've got to give, if Keaton Slovis doesn't like the windows he's getting, you've got to find a way to get those windows a little bit bigger, or get those windows big enough for Slovis to trust them. And if the issue is that the receivers aren't getting to their spots, aren't getting where they're supposed to be, aren't running the routes the way they're supposed to run them, I mean, you have to find a way to make that happen. It's coaching the receivers, it's designing the plays, it's like I say, play design, it's scheme, it's game plan, it's all of those things. And if that's the biggest issue for Slovis right now, that his receivers are letting him down, I mean, I think that falls on Tyquan Underwood. I think it falls on Frank Cignetti, and it falls on the receivers themselves. And I think that has been a big problem for this team. I think there's talent in that group. For whatever reason, though, I don't think they're playing up to the level they need to play. And maybe sometimes, like I say, I think you just have to take a few chances. I think you have to take a few risks. And I don't know that they've necessarily been 100% risk averse in this offense so far, but I think you've got to take a few chances in your throws. If you're going to hand it off on 2nd and 9 or 2nd and 8 and only get 2 yards, you might as well take a shot at throwing the ball 15 yards downfield. Something toward the sideline, something where your guy's going to get it or nobody's going to get it. It just give these guys a chance, and maybe they're able to create a little separation. They have some space to make a catch. But I mean, some of the throws that they were trying, and again, you're facing unique defenses in these situations at the end of a game. Defenses that you're not going to face in the first or the second quarter. But some of those kinds of throws where you're looking for something beyond 8 yards, you're looking for something beyond 12 yards. I think you've got to try to work those in. And maybe Frank Cignetti would sit here and say, "You idiot, we were trying to work them in all game, but the receivers weren't running the right routes, or Keaton wasn't seeing them, or he didn't have time, or this or that." And maybe that's true. I'm not smart enough to sit here and tell you if it is or isn't. But I do think the receivers have been a disappointment. And either because of that or in conjunction with that, I think Keaton Slovis has too. And probably those two things go hand in hand. Let's see. Francis says this offense is a dinosaur, antiquated. Scott Lynch says, I saw Frank Cignetti called Frank Flintstone on the message board. Could not stop laughing. Let's see. Christian Ricketts asked, what's wrong with Izzy Abanikanda? I didn't see. I guess it was said that he had his arm in a sling on the sideline. He was in the injury tent. I didn't see what happened, so I couldn't tell you. I think that play that they were debating was like a 3rd or 4th down, and they were debating if it was a pass or a fumble and that kind of thing. I think he got hurt then. That was the last play I think that he played. That was his last snap. I'm not sure what happened on that play. I'd have to go back and watch the I have to go watch the tape. I'll have to look at the tape to figure that out. But yeah, he didn't come back, so we'll see what comes out of that. Will Hart says, what does it say about Jeff Collins when Georgia Tech plays its best game in years in their first game without him? What's funny is someone on Twitter said, wouldn't it be great if Narduzzi's final prank on Jeff Collins was to lose this game, just as a way to say that you were the thing that was holding Georgia Tech back, that Pitt finally or Georgia Tech finally beat Pitt in the first game that Jeff Collins was gone. I don't think Narduzzi would do that, lose it on purpose just to make that joke, but it was pretty funny. Francis says, who in their right mind would spend money to see this team, buy merchandise, or even waste 4 hours of a Saturday watching this team? Right. So lighten up, Francis. There was a lot of this stuff after the Western Michigan game last year. Pitt will probably only win 2 games. I think there were people legitimately saying Pitt's not going to win more than 4 games. This is going to be a 4-8 season. This is after they opened the year beating UMass and Tennessee, and then they lost to Western Michigan. And there were plenty of posts on the message boards about how Pitt was going to go 4-8 the rest of the way. And of course, they ended up being just fine. Now, I don't necessarily think they're going to go 11-3 this year, but let's just relax on how you're giving up on everything and never want to watch them again. Garrett Sherwin says, why does it seem like in-game adjustments are foreign to this staff? You know what, Garrett? I think they do make adjustments. I mean, we've seen, obvious superficial adjustments like going more shotgun or going more under center or what have you. I think there are probably a lot more adjustments that we don't see, the way they slide the protections, the kind of routes that they run, and combinations, and then obviously on defense with the blitzing and different things like that. They do make adjustments. Sometimes the adjustments work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the coaches make adjustments and the players don't execute them. It's hard for me to sit back here and say, like, they just never make adjustments. I don't know enough. Maybe you know enough, Garrett. I don't know enough to say whether that's happening or not. John Johnson says this is the worst loss in the last 10 years for Pitt. No, it's not. It's not. Because 10 years ago was 2012 when they lost to Youngstown State. 2 years after that, they lost to Akron at home. What else? I already mentioned the North Carolina game in 2017. That was a terrible loss, maybe worse than this one, probably worse than this one. 2018 when they lost to Carolina was a really, really bad loss. That was probably worse than this one. The Boston College game in 2019 was worse than this one, I would say. And Western Michigan last year was a really bad loss. This wasn't the worst loss of the last 10 years. I would disagree about that. Ryan Kaminsky says, Slovis had Bradley open deep on the play. He dumped it to Jacoby. Look, so, I mean, this is one of the hard things. This is like a classic, and not necessarily you, Ryan, but it's a classic armchair quarterback thing where we sit there and we watch the game and we see all the guys who are wide open and the quarterback never sees them. I mean, these guys do have to go through reads. They have an internal clock. I don't know if you're going to make 5 reads. Now, granted, on a play when you throw to Ryan Jacoby, it would seem that you're on your 5th read. But, I don't think they're always going to see all those guys who are wide open. You'd like to think they're going to drop back and be able to scan the field and see everything that's going on and process all that information at once and process the pass rush and process all the guys who are open and process where the coverage is and know exactly who to throw it to and do it all in a matter of like 1.5 seconds or something. But the reality is there's 1 read, 2 reads, and that's probably all you're getting through. I doubt, unless you have a ton of time, that you're going to get anywhere more than 3 reads. And Keaton Slovis on his touchdown pass to Gavin Bartholomew had a lot of time. I don't know if Bartholomew was his first read or not, but was Jaden Bradley wide open on a pass on that play? Maybe. Did Keaton Slovis run out of time to look for him? Possibly. Let's see. Scrolling through here. Christian Ricketts says Matt Canada and Frank Signetti might be the most hated people in Pittsburgh currently. More than Trubisky and Slovis. I'm kidding. I mean, obviously the offensive coordinators all take all the heat, right? Didn't Todd Haley say something like you could average 42 points a game and still they would still want to run you out of town all the time? It's a thankless job to be the offensive coordinator. It's funny because when I think about like what offensive coordinators have gotten like a lot of great pub around here, I mean, I think back to like with the Steelers, at least guys like Mike Mularkey or Ken Wisenhunt. I don't think Todd Haley had any fans around here. Mularkey and Wisenhunt did until they didn't. Matt Canada did when he was here at Pitt. I mean, he was pretty popular among Pitt fans, and they were disappointed to lose him. Sean Watson never did. Whipple only sort of grudgingly last year when Kenny Pickett was lighting it up. I mean, it's a thankless job to be the offensive coordinator. Probably in most places, certainly in Pittsburgh. Stashy says, what if Brendan Marion was promoted to offensive coordinator? I think it would be... I shouldn't have even read that question. Let's see. Scott Lynch says, how much can they really change the offense at this point? And I think that's a really interesting question, Scott. And obviously we're, coming up about the 50-minute mark. I mean, we're only going to be on for a little bit longer. But I think that's a great question about how much can they change the offense at this point. And I don't think it's about changing the offense. I don't think they need to change the offense. They just need to figure out what the hell they want to do. Like And particularly as it relates to the passing game. You need to hone in on the passing game. You need to identify the things you think you can do and get good at them. Figure out what you're good at and emphasize those parts. And it's not a change. It's just figuring out what you want to be and what you think you can be and what you can actually do well. Because they haven't done it to this point. And this was the conversation all week about offensive identity and the missed opportunity of the Rhode Island game. And again, they lost a game and a half of Kedon Slovis. They had a game and a half where they played without him, and that set back. I think that held back the progress and the development there because they didn't have him available. And so you couldn't work through some of those things in the games. And that made the Rhode Island game even more of an important opportunity to work on those things, and even more of a wasted opportunity when they didn't. When they decided to just, take the easy route, we're just going to hand it off, we'll throw some screens, we're not going to really throw the ball downfield, we're not going to really do any of that kind of stuff, we're just going to get out of here with the 3-touchdown win. I understand when you go to Western Michigan, you can't, you are limited in what you can do because you're playing with your third string quarterback on the road. But then I think the circumstances of the Western Michigan game put even more significance on the Rhode Island game and what you did once you had Kedon Slovis back and you were playing an FCS opponent. And they wasted that. That was the time when you could really figure it out and get into a rhythm and get some comfort level. I mean, how many times has Pat Narduzzi, when we ask him about the young outside linebackers, about how they're developing, and he always talks about how after the first game, Bengali Kamara said, Coach, man, being in a game is really different from practice. Well, yeah, it is. And that goes for your quarterback and your wide receivers too. They need to get into a rhythm in a game, and they haven't had that opportunity to really settle in like that. I mean, even look at Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison. Great players, right? They were a lot better their second year together than they were their first year together. They were a lot better once they had that rhythm sort of established. Now, you don't have that same kind of timeline here. You're not talking about what Slovis and Mumfield and Means are going to do next year. You need them to do it right now. And so you needed to get every bit of work that you could for those guys. Now, maybe you could say it started coming together. Maybe you could say, Slovis finished the first half strong tonight and played well in the second half. You could probably make that case. And you could say that, the 3 turnovers did really hurt them because they finally started to get the offense kind of moving and the turnovers, sunk them. They have 3 turnovers. How many drives did they have in the second half? Let me get out my box score here. Find the drives page. So in the second half, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 drives. They go fumble, punt, interception, fumble. Right? So 3 of your first 4 drives, even though your offense seems like maybe it's starting to get a little bit of a rhythm, kind of finish the first half on a strong note, maybe comes out and you start kind of moving a little bit. But then you turn it over 3 of your first 4 drives with a punt and another punt in between. And that last punt kind of due to an intentional grounding penalty and then a tip pass to Marcus Minor that lost 10 yards. So, you finally get a little bit of a rhythm and then you sync it with these turnovers. You needed to be able to develop that rhythm and that continuity and that cohesiveness, that cohesion. You needed to be able to develop that in September. You really never got an opportunity to do it. And so, Scott, to your question of what can they really change about the offense? They're always going to be adjusting things and adding things and taking things out. They need to figure out what they can do well with the passing game and really kind of hone in on that because it will continue to hold them back until they figure it out. It will. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Scrolling down through some questions. Dr. Pitt says this one is on the coaching staff. Poor choices last week led to a terrible start tonight, which made the turnovers super costly. I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Pitt. I think that's, not just that, you and I agree about the Rhode Island game and kind of the missed opportunity there, but about the fact that because they came out so slow in the first half, punt, turnover on downs, because that happened, and the first 5 drives were completely unproductive, you then put yourself in a position that if you had some critical errors like turnovers, they really would sink you. And no, you can't turn the ball over 3 times in a game. No, you can't commit 12 penalties in a game. Those things can't happen. Coaches love to point to that stuff, and they're right. You can't do those things, and it's tough to win a game. You turn the ball over 3 times and commit 12 penalties. You're right. Coaches are right when they say that. But I'm a big believer in giving yourself a cushion so that those things don't kill you. And if you do better than punt, turnover on downs on your first 5 possessions, then you've got a little bit of wiggle room so that those things don't sink you. You know what I mean? So that you're not, when you have a fumble, you're not thinking to yourself, oh God, that was a crucial possession. We really needed that one. Well, if you've given yourself a cushion because you scored a few touchdowns, then you're not pressing so much. You're not going to be sunk by that crucial turnover. Another super chatter comes in here. Scott Lynch says, "Thanks for the great insights." Hey, thank you, Scott. I appreciate you being a super chatter. Win or lose, we're always here, still talking about it. Like I was thinking about this. It'd be funny if I just, because they lost the game, I just canceled all the morning pits and stuff like that. I mean, the reality is we're always going to be here doing this stuff. Monday through Friday, we're going to release the morning pit videos right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can count on that. And we'll be talking about stuff that's probably not as pleasant. We'll be talking about a loss, and how you build forward from a loss. But we're still going to do it. We're still going to do these post-game shows. I was thinking about that too. I'm like, as I was driving home or sitting in the press box after the game, I was like, it's late. It's a loss. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to think about this. They just want to drink their sorrows away and go to bed. Nobody wants to do this. Just skip it. Just don't do it tonight. Do the old drive home podcast and fire that thing up and just talk on the drive home for a half hour, release it as a podcast, and just be done. You don't need to do this live. But I was like, no, we're still going to do it. We're still going to have the live show on Wednesday nights. We're still going to have a live show after every game. We're still going to do the morning pit Monday through Friday because win or lose, we're going to talk about Pitt stuff right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Speaking of, make sure you like this video. That would really, we really appreciate that. Hit that subscribe button down there too. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can turn on notifications and then you get an alert sent to your phone so that you always know when we go live. Like tonight, it was like, what time are we going to start? I don't know, 1:30. We ended up starting at 1:15. Well, if you don't want to just follow every tweet to see what time I announce that we're starting, you can always just turn on notifications from our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then you'll get an alert sent to your phone so you know when we go live. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Click that subscribe button. That would be big. I also have to mention Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the best source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football and basketball and recruiting. We have it all at Panther-Lair.com. Of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. And believe me, there's a lot of interaction right now. I think even though it's 2 a.m, I'm pretty sure if I went on the message boards, or I should say when I go on the message boards in a couple minutes here, it's going to be pretty active. So it's going to be pretty active all day Sunday and certainly through the week as Pitt looks to rebound from its first ACC loss of the season. First one, and now they're 3-2 overall, 0-1 in the ACC. It was bound to happen. There was going to be a loss at some point. I mean, we talked about this, how hard it is to go to win that many games in a row. Like, oh, Pitt's going to win out. Well, if Pitt wins out, that would mean winning 10 games in a row. Finish the regular season. And that was highly unlikely. That probably wasn't going to happen. It's hard to do that. It's hard to win that many games in a row. Unless you have like top tier elite level talent, you're going to have games where, those errors like those turnovers ultimately catch up with you. And so there was always going to be a loss. It was just a question of where or when, I guess, who it would be against and why you lost. And that's probably the biggest thing coming out of this game is the why. It's sure. It sucks to lose to Georgia Tech. It sucks to lose to a team that fired its head coach 5 days ago. It sucks to lose to a team that Pat Narduzzi's never lost. Or no, Pat Narduzzi lost to them in 2017. Shouldn't say never. It sucks to lose a game when you're favored by 24 points. But the why of it, I think, is more important, because that not only sets the table of questions for the coming games, but it's even more concerning when it's a continuation of the questions we had through the first month of the season. And that's the biggest problem right now. They've got to figure out this offense, and they've got to figure out what they're going to do, what they can do, and how they're going to do it going forward. All right, I think we are all done for tonight. Montana Marie, I appreciate you, says, I was checking this channel religiously once I got home, waiting for this win or lose. I will still be thinking about Pitt. Might as well discuss. Hey, Montana Marie, listen, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on the notifications. You'll get a little alert on your phone when we go live, so you don't have to keep checking the channel. But I appreciate you checking in and jumping in with us tonight. All right, Pitt loses 26-21. Panthers fall to 3-2 overall, 0-1 in the ACC. And they'll try to do better next time. So we'll be back, as I say, Monday morning with a new Morning Pit. We'll have one every day next week. Of course, we'll have the live Panther-Lair show on Wednesday night. We will have a post-game show on Saturday night after the game. It's what we do. It's what we're going to keep doing. So keep it tuned in to Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for everybody who jumped in on the live stream tonight. Thanks everybody who listens to the podcast or watches the video later in the weekend. If you didn't want to stay up until 2:30 in the morning, but I appreciate everybody who did stay up until 2:30 in the morning. It's been fun talking with you about this game. Have a good rest of the weekend. Try not to get too down about this loss. We'll see how they bounce back from it. But hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend, and we will talk to you Monday morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.